Panel.
Deputy Jeff Sullivan, Vice Chair.
Deputy Karen Wilson, member of the panel.
Deputy Max Andrews, member of the panel.
Anna Calvani, co-CEO of Jersey Hospitality Association. We represent approximately 200 businesses within our sector.
And Marcus Calvani, the other half of the co-chief executive of Jersey Hospitality Association.
Thank you. If I can just draw your attention to the statement in front of you, that's just for formalities to say that we're covered by parliamentary privilege here. It's also being live streamed and recorded for our benefit, but also for the public. So if you're happy with that, we can proceed.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me just give you some context to what we're doing in terms of this review. It's quite a specific review in a sense. You'll probably know about the triennial regulations and the unlawful entertainments regulations that have been renewed every 3 years for probably the last 20 years or so. And effectively that's to do with the bailiff's customary laws powers, which he can prescribe also penalties for people who don't comply with lawful entertainment. So if you hold an event without the bailiff's permission, effectively that's unlawful, and that can be penalties for that. So these regulations look at what those penalties should be. We're also mindful of the fact that the Minister has indicated he wants to come back with a new framework for the licensing of entertainment, and he wishes to do that in 2 phases. One by bringing primary legislation before the end of this term, if he can, and then but these regulations would run it right till 2027, when he would hope to bring somebody would bring a new framework on top of that. So that's the context really that we're doing the review in. So the first question, I suppose, from your point of view, can you just give a little bit of an oversight of what your roles are and what the Jersey Hospitality Association does as well? Sure.
Do you want to do it? No, you want me to do that? Okay. We play tag team like this. So the Jersey Hospitality Association has been around since the 50s as the Hotel and Guest House Association. In the early 2000s, changed the Jersey Hospitality Association to encompass subsectors of a larger industry that makes up hospitality, or as the government refers to it, the visitor economy. So we now have 10 separate subsectors that cover our members from restaurants and hotels through to supply chains and entertainment and attractions. And so they all have their own subsector chair. And then the chairs make up our board. So our board is representative of the entirety of the industry. And that was a specific setup so that every member could have a form of communication. And the communication works in multi-directions and everybody gets a voice. So that's come about in the last year. We work very closely with the Visitor Economy Strategy Group. We sit on the Visitor Economy Strategy Group as well. And we have a new subsector that's for entertainment and events. So that is run as of the beginning of the year. So that's run by Andrew Thomas, who runs and owns 3D events and does the majority of kind of large scale non-music related events. So does the marathon, mostly sporting stuff, did the Super League.
The Barclays.
The boat show and things like that. So he's got a huge amount of experience and works multi-island as well. So he's given us some kind of feedback.
So that subsection that's already running as of
Tis, yes. Yeah. Tis, yeah. So he's in charge of communicating out to those members that fit into that group, and again having their communication back to him and then back to us as a board. So it's working quite well. The association has kind of grown about 30% in the last 12 months. And there's a structure there that seems to be working and far more kind of formalised as to being able to represent what is a very diverse industry and historically might have only been kind of looked at as restaurants and hotels, but actually covers a lot more. As Anna said, we've got about just over 200 companies that are members, and they make up just over 400 establishments. So it's quite a significant number of businesses that we speak for when we try and represent everybody with it. And I must say that actually the other thing that's become quite apparent with this subsector structure is that not all subsectors may have the same opinion on everything, which is also challenging for us, but at the same time, I think the reality of a diverse industry.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. That's good. That's a helpful overview. If I can turn to the question, I suppose, of your direct experience. So it could be your own direct experience.
Yeah.
It could be that you've heard from some of your members about putting events on. So could you tell us maybe about the process that you need to go through? You could also give us some examples of events that you've had put on recently or in memory, that whether they were straightforward or complex.
Yeah, I think for transparency too, we should say that we run the Lido down at Havre des Pas, which is primarily an event space. Yeah. So we do somewhere between kind of 40 and 50 events a year. They vary from weddings through to large corporates. Now that's slightly different because the site is a licensed premises, so you can have a private party there as a licensed establishment and it not kind of fall into the same remit as this. But we do have some experience historically with putting on public events and going through the application process. And we've had a jolly good briefing from our subsector chair this morning. So I think the general thought of his subsector is that it works, but it's incredibly onerous and it's quite complicated and it's a little bit disjointed. And if you're very experienced in it like he is, it's doable and you know who to talk to and you know what the process is. But if you're new coming into it, it can be incredibly complicated. And while the information is available on the government website as to who to contact and what to do, the reality is you probably end up going to the bailiff's office first, and then they tell you where you need to be going afterwards. Now, Andrew did mention that actually, in his experience, and obviously he has a lot of experience in it, once he's done each of these applications, the bailiff's office does share it out to the different entities, so it kind of makes it quite easy. But we had a conversation about, could that whole process be streamlined? Could it be digitized? Is there a way of being far more transparent about how far through the process you are? You would think with technology nowadays, you should be able to pop it in there and it tell you what else you need and how far along you are and share it with the relevant organisations. I think the feedback was that the bailiff's chambers are extremely helpful. And once you've built a relationship with them, they do help. They're keen to support, and they encourage if it's done correctly, which at the end of the day, I think they should be doing. So I think Andrew's opinion was, if you're a responsible event organizer and you've got experience, it works. But I think cumbersome and clunky were his two words that I think he chose to describe it. Which obviously we can all make things smoother.
I guess one question is that you wouldn't want to replace one bureaucrat. I'm not saying it's bureaucratic, but one clunky system for another clunky system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was the concern. Then we got back. It's like, well, have you been presented what is going to happen alternatively?
Yeah.
Like, no, not yet. So they're keen to hear that information. Say, okay, if we are considering changing the process, what is it presented? What is it looking like? What what is being proposed? So we can compare and say, actually, it was better the old way, or this sounds fantastic. It will streamline things. So we don't know what could be alternative.
I'm happy to bring in. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, indeed. Obviously, we've just spoken about what would be the alternative, especially for both of you who are obviously in the industry. You have a lot of experience at what you do. So would it probably be better if there was maybe, say, political representation who was able to decide on whether events could go ahead, say, at a ministerial level, potentially even maybe the contact with each respective parish over that of the bailiff who currently presides over the decision-making process?
So I think our concern with that would be, and we speak of this concern not just for entertainment and events. We have been kind of heavily involved with the alcohol licensing law at the moment, and I think that needs to tie quite closely with what's going on here. I think the 4-year political swing can become incredibly problematic, because if you fall into that period of purdah and that kind of stuff, then the whole island just grinds to a halt. So I think the advantage of the bailiff's chamber is that it's a continuum the entire way through, and it doesn't have that cycle. The other alternative would be to have some kind of independent entity, such as, I don't know, the Gambling Commission or that kind of thing, that sat there with a constant, so that you could apply to it. It is part of their priority of the day. It can be done relatively quickly. I think the process of this application at the moment I think they look for about a 6-month time window before you have an event. And I think the reality is our industry moves pretty fast. And so if there is suddenly a need for an event, yes, you can go in there. And again, if you've got experience and the right relationships, you can get it through quicker. But 6 months is an enormously long period of time. And why does it take 6 months to put on an event for approval? And during that period, I think it should also be aware that as somebody who's taking that financial risk in order to put on an event, you can't really secure your finances until you get the yes. So it might be 6 months of getting the yes, and then another 3 months or so on before you can actually get the funding in place and get the rest of the structure. So it definitely takes a lengthy period of time. Now, Anna touched on before, what is the alternative? And when we attended an event, didn't we, for events companies that was put on by government. And it was discussed, can you digitise the experience? Can you literally go on, put in your name, put in your company, if you've got one, put in what it is, a description, and it start to pull up, here's all the things that you need to fulfil in order to do it. And that clearly is quite a nice, transparent and clear way for anybody to go through the process.
Yeah.
Can I just come in there straight away? 6 months sounds like an enormous length of period.
It's a long period of time to be worried about whether you can or you can't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think our understanding
that means that some event that's happening in the world can't be celebrated or whatever is required in Jersey because it would be yesterday's news.
Yeah.
Yesterday's chip paper.
And I must say, from our personal experience, it's quicker than that. But I think that's what's in writing, and I think the reality is, is it their priority in there to be doing it, or do they have an enormous amount of other things that they're responsible for delivering to? And that's where I think we say somebody like the Gambling Commission, obviously they're dealing with gambling, but could there be an entity there that's not specific probably to events until we get to a stage where we're a heavily event
licensing commission.
Yeah, that kind of thing where it's actually pretty easy. It's how have you done? Fill it in online. It looks like you're 75% through, sir. Can we have this, that, and the other? And we'll get it approved as quickly as possible. I think it would be easier that way.
Can I just ask you, Marcus? You mentioned the issue around PERDA.
Yeah.
And so you've got the 6-month period where you will actually be waiting for the decision, and then potentially a PERDA period in the middle of all of that.
Yeah.
So given those scenarios, what would be the longest period of time, do you think, in the current legislation that would actually require, how soon would you be able to get a decision given those scenarios? And what impact does that have on business?
So
generally?
PERDA at the moment wouldn't impact it, right, because it goes through the bailiffs.
Yeah, if it does change.
But if it is.
If it moved to ministerial, PERDA lasts, how long does PERDA last?
3 months.
3 months. So you could be 9 months.
PERDA presumably shouldn't come into play if it's well, I know we're hypothetical at the moment, but if it's run by an administration of some sort, it could be in-house economic development, it could be a parish run thing, or it could be an independent
So I think from a parish standpoint, it could be done at a parish level and not involve the constable. I mean, it could be done within the economic development department and not involve the minister, in which case the PERDA wouldn't impact it. But if it is going to be a ministerial decision, then we do start to run, those potential risks.
Okay.
Thank you. And I suppose just to maybe make it even more tangible, could you give us an example? So I come to you, want to put on a wedding or a music event at the Lido or somewhere else.
Very easy there, but
It's a whole difference, private versus public.
Yeah.
That's the huge difference.
Because you're obviously a licensed premises, so you've got a rolling entertainment license, I guess.
Yeah. So once you are looking at selling tickets, advertising to the public to come there, that's considered a public. So it's a whole different kettle of fish for sure. And we do very few actually. In the past 8 years, we've done one.
So if you wanted to put, I know obviously there's the Hovre de Par Festival already, but if you wanted to put an equivalent new
on
festival on a
in
beach
public
somewhere,
space.
what would you go through?
So you'd have to do your business plan or your event-based plan. Part of that would have to be security analysis and have a third-party licensed security company looking at that. You'd have to have a fire department kind of recommendations on fire safety and escape routes and all that kind of stuff based on your occupancy and the structure or not structure you're in.
And the fire trucks being able to access them.
Yeah, we're going through that with a JHA one at the moment.
An event and having to change the site because the fire truck didn't fit through there, so we're like, we can't use this site now.
So then you probably need to also, with large numbers of people, communicate with somebody like St John's Ambulance or have a plan in place with that as well. You'd have to get your public health and environmental health structure set up if you were doing food with that, and then you put together the package and you take it to the bailiff's chamber, and they would kind of analyse it, have a look at it, discuss it with you, and send it out to the various entities. The fees are, I believe, extremely reasonable. I mean, I don't think the fees are anything that the industry has any issue with. It's just that time period, and it's that clunkiness of every time you do it, you've got to go back through that same process again. So, is there a way to make that smoother and swifter? Are there some relatively basic information sheets from each department that could be filled in or put into a multi-box ticking exercise online so that you're not left thinking, have I done it? What haven't I done? Is it going to get approved? Is it going to get sent back? I think that question mark part of it, I think, is the thing that leaves the business community in concern. And new regulations. I mean, we're constantly, as an island, bringing in new regulations that we're not particularly good at sharing. And suddenly you find that something's been slipped in at the back of a regulation that you've missed or you didn't know about, and then it's coming back to fix it again and send it back out. So I think the digital route is definitely something that could, definitely take those question marks out and smooth it up a bit.
Okay, good.
Obviously, as a license present, though, but a licensed premises is a completely different situation. So if you've got your entertainment, you still need to have a bailiff's entertainment permit. So you need a P49 on top of your Category 7 licence in order to have entertainment. And that's quite prescriptive, that P49 process. So when you go through application for the P49, you have to define what types of entertainment you're going to be having in that establishment, and it's written onto that license, and that's a rolling 1 year. You have to renew it every year. So it is prescriptive, and I think over the years, I think we've caught up with the fact that actually you can't be that prescriptive. You just don't know. We might have a bride that comes in and suddenly says, "Well, actually, I'd like to." Have some very strange form of entertainment that nobody's ever had before, and it's perfectly innocent, but it just hasn't been prescribed on your P49. So you start to then try and be as creative as possible with the P49 writing, so that it opens you up to be able to do as many things as possible.
What are some of the prescriptions there around like music and a number of instruments?
So it'll be music. It'll be whether it's amplified or not amplified. It'll be the type of dancing. I think our one's got silent disco written on it. Stage performers, poetry. It's pretty prescriptive. But if you suddenly had somebody in who liked to juggle reading books, does that fit into it or does it not fit into it? And so at the end of the day, I think it's amplified or non-amplified musical entertainment, and then there must be some more generic entertainment category that it can fit into, as opposed to being quite that prescriptive.
Thanks. So I think we've covered the difference between private and public events, so private events are probably a lot more simple, especially if they're in an existing venue, but it's maybe new events and public events that really cause the problem in terms of the leading.
We assume that's kind of what this is about. Yeah.
No, indeed.
Is there a clear definition on, which is what might be a slightly rhetorical question, is there a clear definition on what defines a public event?
So we're also asking that question. I think because the definition is entertainment, and of course this is about unlawful entertainment, which is entertainment without permission. Yeah, I think we're looking at that. We don't have a clear answer, but it's something that you need permission for as an event. So clearly, a gathering isn't an event because you're allowed to gather under human rights. But when you start to put, I suppose the ordinary understanding of entertainment is what we might understand is like music, and fun.
So could you therefore have a food and beverage gathering that's not very good fun, and it not fall into this? I mean, there seems to be a big kind of question mark as to what is this? Is it something that is publicised? So if you're promoting it, does it become an event?
I guess, these are questions that we're going to put to other witnesses, presumably like law officers or bailiffs department. But I'm guessing some of that, it depends on what other agencies need to be involved. So if you need to inform the fire department or St John or the ambulance first, so those things probably define what you need permission for. So it's a bit of a circular argument in that sense. But so we're going to be interested in that.
Can I just add? I think that's, as the chair has said, I think that's part of this review process, which is to bring some clarity to it. You just mentioned the variation if there was a request made is it
P49?
49. How long does it take for any variation to be recognised? Do you know? And have you at any stage been aware that any of your members, having attempted to get a variation, perhaps have been subject to an allegation that perhaps they have been illegally providing an event or an entertainment, despite the fact that they've attempted to actually get a variation to their licence?
So we have had members in the past, not since we've been in the CEO role, but when I sat on the board before, that have been questionably in trouble over providing forms of acoustic entertainment in establishments that are licensed but don't have a P49, and they just are unaware of the fact that they would have needed to have a bailiff's entertainment permit in order to have the guitar player sit in the corner of the restaurant that one night. So there is, I think there's a lack of understanding that is the process, and in general, the industry assumes that a P49 is only ever tied with a Category 7 licence, which is an entertainment licence. So you wouldn't probably assume, if you were a restaurateur, that if you wanted to have a Spanish-themed evening in your restaurant, you wanted somebody playing the Spanish guitar, that actually that's a form of entertainment and you may be violating your restaurant licence by not having a P49 in order to do it. The licensing process in this island is immensely complicated. And I think part of this event's work and a kind of relook at the alcohol licensing law as well, there is definitely multiple ways that we can simplify that process and still make sure that everybody's behaving themselves in the process.
Yeah.
You want to go on to that and say,
I don't know. It's a different scrutiny here, isn't it? I mean, there is some schools of thought. The problem that we have is that if you write a brand new law, it's a lengthy process. There's a backup of draftsmen and women, and then it has to be approved, and then it has to go to Privy Council, and then it has to come back. And if you have a ministerial 4-year change in the middle of that process, you may be starting again. And in the 12 years we've been back, I've redrafted the alcohol licensing law 3 times, and it just stops and it starts again. So we then start to look at, can you make changes to the existing laws, because that's the faster process than writing a new law. I think with the 1950s tourism law, yes, it's relatively easy to just eradicate quite a lot of the kind of detail that's come onto it over the years that's no longer relevant. The alcohol licensing law, I think, as far as the industry is concerned, again, it works, but it's an incredibly complicated and clunky process, and you don't really know whether you're going to get approved or not approved, and it's only quarterly. It could be as simplified as on license, on trade and off trade licenses, and you going and explaining, my name's Jeff and I'd like to open this and this is my business plan. Yes, perfect. We'll keep an eye on you for 6 months or 12 months.
In a moment, we'll pass over to Deputy Andrews, but just one final question from me is, you mentioned the risk of a break in the middle. So one of the things we're trying to understand is getting the balance between the Minister on the one hand saying it's going to take me a while to bring in a new law, including new regulation, but also on the other hand, we're quite keen as a panel to make sure that as much gets done in this term before an election and potentially, a different government which might not have this as a priority. I guess the question is, in terms of your preference, when would you like to see this headway being made with this new law?
We're private entrepreneurs, so tomorrow. I think in the private sector we move at a completely different speed, and I think a lot of the frustration that comes between public and private sector is just that completely different concept of timescale and how long it takes to do something. So I think we've got a minister in place at the moment who is very pro the visitor economy, and new visitor economy strategy calls for growth, which is a fantastic thing that our industry has been calling out for we haven't had a strategy for 20-something years. So I think it is important that we remove as many barriers to business and growth and progression as we possibly can before the next election.
And so would you like to see, in an ideal world, to see this a completely new system before the next election, if possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for responding to the questions there. I'm just interested to know, in your experience, the probability of events that have been cancelled in the past and the impact that has had on businesses.
Cancelled because of this system, or
due to the current system that's in place.
I'm not sure if we're aware of a particular one. Not to say that there haven't been cases. From the association's point of view, as I hope you can appreciate, not everybody in our industry is a member. So there are plenty of businesses within our sector that do not subscribe to being a member. So we wouldn't know everybody's, challenges. We do have good forms of communications with the businesses that are members. So they do keep us up to date or call us always if there is an issue for support and guidance, but if they're not, we wouldn't know sometimes. So it's hard to say, really.
I think this subsector has the ability to be a little bit more pop-uppy, if that's, I don't think pop-uppy is a word, but we've got long-term establishment member entities that have been working in this subsector for many, many years. But it's quite easy to get excited as an individual and say, I'm going to put on an event and it's going to be a wonderful thing. It's a bit like we see regularly, people might make a lot of money and they suddenly decide that what they really want in life is a restaurant. And I would regularly tell you, go and spend all of that money in somebody else's restaurant, don't do it yourself. But the reality is, I think people do put on events. I think once they're too deep into it, they realise this is an extremely expensive industry. This can go wrong very easily. If you don't sell enough tickets, suddenly you're upside down. And there have been entities that have obviously done it, not got the spreadsheets quite right, and have ended up never doing it again as a result of it. And so then you kind of see the next person who comes along and gives it a go. And we as an association will encourage anybody to give it a go. We're there to try and help guide you in the right direction so that you don't stumble at the last hurdle. But it is, you see it every year. There's the odd event that pops up that hasn't been done before, and some of them work and some of them don't. But it is risky on an island that's our size. I know in the strategy there is a call for growth of the visitor economy through event-led tourism, and I think that's something which we've got to get this right in order to help happen. But that means much larger volumes of people coming to Jersey for that, and then we get into all sorts of other worlds of various conversations about we probably need to enable people to camp in a field if we're going to have a big music festival and stuff like that.
Sorry, can I just ask? So, in terms of the poppy up industry. on the whole, those people have actually been approved under the law to hold an event. Are there any, or is there any feedback from those where those events have failed or they don't feel that they can proceed, that they have sort of communicated the fact that meeting some of those legal requirements was costly to them, or were they perhaps maybe having had the licence felt that they couldn't actually continue to invest and deliver that kind of response or that kind of offer to the visitor economy? And is there anything in their delivery where they felt, having got the licence, in order to make it financially viable, some of them may well have steered on the sort of unlawful sort of path, if you like, to actually just make it financially viable? I think what I'm trying to do is trying to establish the balance between meeting the legal requirements and then the financial viability of a business that doesn't have the track record as you've just described, and whether there is a potential for some risks there in the current legislation that we're not picking up or that we've not established.
I'm not sure the costs come from, tell me if I'm wrong here, I don't think the costs necessarily come from the legislation part of it. There are enormous costs that are caused by excessive health and safety and public safety and security stuff, and so your security bills for an event can be enormous, and then your number of public toilets that they prescribe you to have can be an enormous cost on the top of it, and suddenly you want to have a screen in the middle of a park, and we don't actually have any of those screens on the side, and so then they're shipping them in from. There's definitely, if we're going to become an event-led tourism-based island, we need to have significant amount of infrastructure on our island already that is there and usable for multiple entities, so that we can, the costs associated with putting on an event to then charge the consumer or the guest to even break even from a standpoint of entry tickets some of the time is prohibitive by the time you've put all of those costings together.
I suppose my question is more about, is it more likely that people may be in danger of breaking the law if they have a business offer that, in order to comply, may well be prohibitive for them to continue to deliver that business?
Well, I think the more prescriptive, the more you micromanage, and the more you put extra costs on a business owner that might not actually be necessary but are prescribed for everybody, I guess the higher chance you run of that risk. So I think in different scenarios, for example, in different scenarios you need different amounts of security, or you need different amounts of toilets. If there is too prescribed, as if this is the number of people who come, this is the number of security you need, and this is the number of toilets, then yes, you burden that event with costs that might not actually be necessary, and that's where I think you start to run the risk of it, because as an event,
breach the regulations in order.
Yeah, and you say, actually, I can't afford those toilets, I'm going to have half the amount, and then you're suddenly in breach, and actually, possibly it was enough.
Is there an uneven playing field in certain areas where, for example, some events you see a heavy honorary police presence, which is, I don't know if that's reimbursed, I'm not sure how it works, but others, you might have events which entirely need to be privately secured, so private security. Is there an issue around that, or is that not something that you've come across?
I'm not sure. Does the parish play the honorary police? So you have a huge number of St Helier, for example, does a lot of events.
Somewhat into. I think what we're trying to do is ascertain what a new system might look like and how that might be constructed. But I've heard of reimbursements need to be made, or contributions for certain things, but obviously the honoraries are not paid by nature, but there might be a cost to providing services in terms of infrastructure, cars and petrol, that kind of thing. But
I don't know.
I think there have been conversations about remunerating police officers for being able to assist those.
The state's police definitely have started to look at it, and I don't know how it works with the honoraries. I mean, at the end of the day, with St Helier is slightly different beast in itself because it's got a much bigger structure within the parish hall. But they do, they do a large number of the larger events on the island are run by the parish, and one would assume that therefore the honorees are up for helping. It's part of the parish.
Can I come back to the pop-up? Because I don't think it's an elephant in the room, but there's going to be a couple of very high-profile visitors come to the island in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And that will no doubt be very well organised, and it will be that's being turned around in a number of a few weeks. If you had a couple of pop stars that you knew of that were happened to be free and were coming over to Jersey, they could only come over in 3 weeks, and you wanted to put an event on for them outdoors. How likely do you think you would be able to put that event on?
I think you could.
I think you answered that yourself.
You could do it. You could do it in a private venue, right? So
you could do it.
Private venue,
You would go down the
absolutely.
private venue route.
Yes. You have to find a venue that's got the right level of licenses, and then quickly, if you have the right amount of funds, to turn around and make that event happen. Because again, it comes down to the lack of the infrastructure that we have on the island to be able to sustain that. Because everybody in the events industry always looks at calendars. Everybody from charities to sporting events, so-and-so's, it's a weekender, all the resources are going to be taken by the weekender. So you're not going to put any other event on because it's such a big event in the calendar. And everybody tries to work around those big events throughout the year. And it's kind of sad in a way but that's the only way you can make it happen. Even if you have the funds, you just know the resources are not on the island to get you the supplies, to get you the logistics of, generators and toilets and, all the things that we were just talking about to be able to put on multiple events in the same weekend.
I think we're in a uniquely strange scenario at the moment on this island because we have such a lack of event space. So, one of the reasons why we decided to do, or were asked to do what we did at the Lido, was a lot of those bigger ballrooms have shut in the hotels. The event spaces have closed. Okay, our opera house is currently closed. So you're pushed to doing things in marquees effectively because there isn't a decent centralised Jersey event space. And if we had a multi-thousand, seat or occupancy event centre, then I think a lot of this would be very different because if you did have a couple of pop stars, you'd bring them on in there and you'd assume that would already be a licensed structure. Because we don't, we're popping marquees up down piers and in fields and all over the place.
And each one needs to be licensed every time.
Does Fort Regent fit in there
Or
not? Or?
Well, I mean, I'd say avoiding the topic of what's the state of Fort Regent, it did, didn't it? So, I mean, it did, and we refused to ever say in the heyday because we believe that the world is a different place and the industry is different. But in the past, you saw larger named pop stars perform at Fort Regent and it had the occupancy there and it was already licensed and you didn't have to apply for a permit in order to do it. So, yes, and we certainly hope as an association that it's not too long before we see a decent-sized event space come back because without more hotel beds and without an event space, it's quite hard to have an event-led tourism boom. So it's clearly got to be something that's got to come in order to make that happen.
Before we move on to question 3, Matt, which you'll ask in a moment, if that's all right. I've got a question. I think we've touched on it possibly, but could you tell us if there's a difference between putting on events in different parishes? So if you've got an event in St Helier, public event, for example, versus one in St Wan's in a field in a marquee, is there a...
We do have members that come up against, and I think we don't think it's a secret. There is a little bit of a NIMBY issue that goes on. So I don't want to have a big corporate doing a marquee that's at the side of my enormous estate in the middle of the countryside because I might be able to hear a noise when I'm, going to bed or sipping my champagne in the garden. I don't know. So I think they have a lot more barriers to being able to put on events in those rural locations than St Helier, for example, that is more used to it. And I understand that, and the fact that if you live in St Helier or in the denser areas of St Helier, you're probably slightly more used to a certain level of noise. But I think one of the things that is unique about Jersey is that we do events in some pretty unique locations, and that's what probably will drive people to come here and experience and spend, is being able to do things that are not necessarily in a 5,000 occupancy square box in one location all the time. So I think we've got to get that balance right. If we're going to get people on a plane to come to our island, it's going to have to be something that's different than if you drive down the road in Birmingham and go to a box with no windows.
Yeah, thank you.
The panel notes under the current regulations, anybody who is responsible for holding an event who's not gone through the official process could be subject to 6 months imprisonment or an unlimited fine. So do you think this acts as a good deterrent? And have you ever experienced events that have been held and no official process has been followed by the event holders?
So I think, and we spoke with Andrew about this earlier, I think the general consensus is a non-prescriptive fine and jail is potentially disproportionate to what happens. And his opinion, and actually I think we probably as business owners agree, that actually a temporary closure or ban on you being able to do it is actually probably worse than being fined or going for 6 months holiday in Lemoy. I think you could violate it in such a different scale of ways. And as we said before, if you don't actually know whether it is an event or not to begin with, you might not have even realised that you violated it. So that, and then you find yourself with 6 months in jail for something. Whereas you could be very, very aware of the fact that you've had a 3,000 person rave with various bars and all the rest of it all night long. So I mean the variation within this remit is huge. To the business owner that wants to run events, a ban or a temporary ban is far more concerning, I think, for them, and that really lies and ties with the way that the alcohol licensing law is too. If you behave and manage in an inappropriate manner, you're going to lose your license, and you lose your license, you lose your livelihood. And
so that follows on to the question, if you don't mind me interrupting, Max. So in the sense that it's the venues that are licensed as well as maybe the person. So certainly for licensing, you need to have a licensed person and a licensed premises. But in the event sphere, you might have somebody who's a very experienced event organiser but just doesn't have premises. So that person, I mean, could we look to licensing an individual for that rather than saying, look, you're a competent person with experience, therefore you can put on events in certain areas?
I'm pretty sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if you have an event and you want to sell alcohol, you still need to transfer a license from an existing licensed premise into that event space.
That's right.
That's a minefield, because is it actually a transfer or is it a duplication of a license during the same period of time? Does the establishment have to close while the other thing's going on or not? These are all big question marks that we still don't really understand, and I unfortunately know that law probably too well. There are elements that and Andrew had mentioned, sporting events of a large size don't actually need to apply. So there are events that are going on that don't apply for licenses. So charities don't do it. So it's really, I think, the bigger problem is the definition of what is this event or is it not event? Is it a charitable gathering? Is it a sports group or club gathering? Is that an event or not an event? And
has anybody explained the difference as to why they're treated differently at all?
So we asked Andrew what his take on the definition of an event, and he felt that if you publicise and promote it's an event. If you don't publicise and promote, it's not an event. But is that prescriptive enough? I mean, if I run a sporting club that's full of members and we want to have a get-together and I've put it on our Facebook page, am I promoting it? I think it's a tricky one. I think obviously you guys are looking at it as part of this, but what defines an event that needs this type of application process, and what can you do that doesn't need it?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I think we've got. I think we've covered 4, Jeff, which is about the timeline. Karen, can you ask the next couple?
Yeah. Marcus, the panel understands that there are a number of associated items of legislation within the event and entertainment's licensing, and that these will be updated in the future. Could you or Anna tell us what are the key elements that need to be addressed in developing the new legislation, first of all?
Bearing in mind you might have touched on some already.
We've probably touched on some, right?
Yeah.
So I think as an industry, if we can make this type of legislation tie and correlate with the alcohol licensing law, I think is critical, because we've got too many laws that are kind of touching what you would assume as a business owner are the same thing, but actually aren't, or overlapping slightly. Obviously, as I think we've probably made quite apparent, some kind of digital, transparent application process that's swifter, cleaner, even more easily accessible.
To give access to newcomers in the industry, I think that's the reason. Because the ones that are here and are established, they know. They've done it for several years. And I think if we are going to attract new entrepreneurs, new event organisers, and our, the younger generation that want to find that industry exciting and they want to get involved in it, and there are lots of fantastic musicians on the island, they think, oh great, we're going to do this. But how do they get around that if they don't have the background of it?
When you talk about the interplay between various legislative programmes, are there any particular areas? I know you've talked about alcohol licensing, but if I were to ask you, what are your top 3 or 4 areas of legislation that impact upon the ability to hold an event?
Environmental health, alcohol licensing.
It's just health and safety.
Yeah, so I'd say it's health and safety, alcohol licensing, and legislation-wise, those are the 2 big. I mean, those are the 2 big ones, aren't they?
Sorry,
so carry on.
Sorry, and in terms of how would you want those to be addressed in any new legislation?
What are your wish lists? Yeah.
I think we touched before on, if you want to sell alcohol at an event, you've got to transfer an existing license. Clearly, that's something that's got to be dealt with, because if Max is having an event and comes to me and wants to transfer my license, I might not even be there. I'm liable for what Max is up to while running the event. I mean, that's an extraordinary scenario for anybody to be put in. So I think there's modernisation of that alcohol licensing element, and then I think there needs to be an equal level playing field when it comes to the health and safety components. And with environmental health, we have is it an event? Is it not? And when the French market comes to Jersey, is that an event? Does it apply for an event?
What do you mean by a level playing field? Can you give us?
So you've got. I'll use it as an example, and I don't know what the answer is. But when the French market traders come to Jersey, for example, do they fall under the same public health and environmental health standards that a local catering entity does? Have they been checked? Do they have an Eat Safe rating? Those kind of stuff, or actually do they not? And are they paying the same taxes? Are they paying the same pitch fees? Do they have the same rules and regulations in place? Because we certainly have members that find that very frustrating, that you're here as a local entrepreneur running a business, and yet the government helps bring in other people onto the island that have lower operating costs, come and do exactly what you're doing on a daily basis, and then leave and say thank you very much.
And does the legislation, in your view, capture any of that? Do you think there are some gaps in the current legislation that cause that concern amongst Jersey businesses?
I think the overly, what did Andrew describe it as, cumbersome and clunky. So I think the cumbersome, clunky element of it causes unnecessary question mark. And back to that French market, is that an event? I don't know. Is that an event? Is it not an event? Have they applied for, who organises it? Have they applied for it to a bailiff's panel? And the chap who's selling the French cider, whose licence have they transferred? I mean, it's, I think it's so overly complicated that it just creates an unnecessarily number of questions, when actually, if we strip it right back and look at it from 30,000 feet, we're having a fun gathering of people that are, hopefully trying to not cause any harm. And I think a lot of this is overly controlled for the sake of maybe historically there was once upon a time a rave that went wrong, and so we've written lots and lots of laws and we hold everybody accountable to it.
I've just written controls down there as you were speaking. In terms of the, so what you've just described is actually there are three dimensions to this, which is the public and the private events which are required or requested from local businesses, but then we've got an international dimension to this as well, where businesses are coming into the island to actually set up. And one of the things I think we need to look at is how the regulations take action against some of those businesses if they don't comply with the legislation. And that's what I'm interested to know is are you aware of what are the requirements for any of those businesses coming into the island to comply with the regulations that we have here?
I think a lot of times they just assume it's the same as the UK. Whenever I've had calls personally on our personal business forum, entities that do large events in the UK or even...
We had one last week where you had to explain the entire process.
I think, we just kind of end up saying, right, you need to go to this website, you need to go gov.je, you have to look at, even one of them was trying to do some kind of bingo event, and they're like, okay, this is a gambling commission, you have to deal with that.
Okay, so take them through the process.
Take. So no, they just assume it's the same.
Different types of entertainment need different. Yes. I think you've just touched on something right there. That if you wanted to have there seems to be a trend, certainly Europeanly at the moment, for these entertainment bingo nights where you stand on the table and you dance, and then there's some live music, and then you play bingo and you eat something, and it's that, and just stopping and thinking about it for a second, is a minefield. You need gambling permission, you need alcohol licensing permission, you need an event permit. I mean, the health and safety component of dancing on a table. I mean, when you imagine if you're my size, Jeff. So I think you've got stuff that is actually not really that complicated going on elsewhere. That as an island, I think we are overly regulated. We have a huge amount of regulation that seems to, the barriers to business is something that I think draws huge attention on the fact that actually, can we just get rid of a lot of this? And is it actually going to cause any damage? And will it actually open up the ability for the economy to thrive and to start to grow? Have we overly regulated and strangled our economy as a result of it?
But just on that then, will in your opinion, will the events industry be detrimentally impacted should no update on the events legislation be put in place prior to July 2027?
I think we've got, obviously we touched on it before, but it's multifactorial. We need you need to be able to get equipment onto the island in order to do an event. So there are elements of, is there equipment here? What are the costs associated with it? You know, is there actually the demand? Do we have the footfall? All of that side of it that's separate from the regulation part of it. But I think we're not going to see growth in that subsector of the industry and an economic increase to our visitor economy unless we strip out some of the regulation that's in there at the moment, because
and make it, have it accessible.
And have it
for
accessible.
Newcomers coming into the industry that want to
Yeah.
come.
So what you're describing is that if there is no update before 2027, we're losing opportunities to actually
Definitely,
build
definitely.
business. Okay.
I think, you know, that's definitely the case, that we need to be seen as somewhere that is promoting and up for business, and it is open arm to help this, as opposed to having constant barriers there to try and stop things happening all the time.
Facilitate, not regulate.
Yeah, facilitate.
That's my-
Yes,
my
yes.
tag.
Anna's having some T-shirts printed with that.
And perhaps finally, but perhaps not, how does the UK run things? Are there marked difference between the UK, and are there examples elsewhere in let's say Europe that do things differently and stroke better?
So we have a maybe it's my Jerseyman in me, but I struggle where we ever compare ourselves with the UK, because I think we've got a unique opportunity to not be the UK, and we've also got a unique opportunity to not be the mainland Europe. But you have to look at, I think we have to give credit to the French, for example. You know, the amount of social gatherings that they have, and markets and festivals and celebrations that go on in small towns around the Normandy and Brittany area is extraordinary, and it's vibrant, and it brings community together, and of every age range. Alcohol is there at almost everything. There's not a problem with the way that people consume. We don't see overconsumption. People are having a glass of wine with a child sat in a pram next to them is something that's totally normal. And we certainly, as an association and looking at the alcohol licensing law, have a desire to not just change the regulation, but how do we change over the span of a generation the behaviour of what goes on in Jersey and its relationship with gatherings and community gatherings and alcohol and antisocial behaviour and that side of it. So I think we should be looking south when we start to look at how do we grow this type of entity of events. Definitely, it seems to be far more community spirit driven.
A lot of French towns, you go to the mayor or the town hall and get permission, and it's I presume it's fairly straightforward, but you know. We can take a field trip, I think.
They've probably got as many regulations as we have, they just ignore them.
Yeah, they might take a pragmatic stance.
It may be. I mean, there may not be regulation that's there to begin with, and you know, maybe you just get penalised for doing. You know, I think one of the big things that we're keen on too is having people who serve alcohol in our mind should have some kind of training. So we saw it when we lived in the United States, and I had something called a bar, which wasn't the legal bar, but you had a half a day or a 1 day training course in responsible alcohol service and understanding what do people look like when they've had too much, how do you deal with them, that side of it. And I think if we start to understand that actually it's a profession and people need training in it, and put the responsibility onto the business owner and the people serving it, drive people out of the off-trade binge drinking, preloading, duty-free purchasing, consumption that we've got into as an island, into a regulated, safe environment of the on-trade, and make it more economically viable for that. I think we will change our culture in the island quite dramatically as a result of just doing that, and make it a safer place to be having events and service and all the rest of it, because people that are doing it are trained and have understanding of it.
Max, are you good?
Yeah, all good.
All good?
Yeah.
Right, unless you've got any questions for us, I think that's...
No, we'll be keen to know, to have feedback as far as your findings and definitions, because it sounds like it's a process of exploration in all areas as far as...
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, like I started off this, that in some ways what we're looking at is fairly narrow, but I think the wider context of it is we're mindful of all the things that you've raised and the fact that there is a context to this, which includes other bits of legislation, including the alcohol licensing laws. So anything we don't necessarily make findings or recommendations on now, we'll certainly be using those, I would have thought, for future work.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
I think if you know, as a government, if you guys can support where the support is needed for a change of the alcohol licensing law and this part, and I know the ones that are already being changed from a tourism law in this existing governmental time period, I think the industry will be very grateful for that, because it will tie well with the visitor economy strategy, and it's set up that we can actually deliver it in a much easier way to those targets.
yeah. Thank you for that.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.